Welcome to the Caffeine stream on Caffeine and Philosophy.
Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to the 7th episode of the Caffeine stream from Caffeine Philosophy. I'm your host, C.V. Robertson, and today I wanted to do a subject that a listener requested. They said, Chris, there are basically no podcasts about the Iliad and the Odyssey and about Homer. And the ones that do exist are all about how Achilles is gay and stuff. So do you think you could talk about that? And for those of you who aren't aware, who are maybe new to me or to my content, Homer is a great love of mine. And here we're going to talk about how you can love things without being gay. This is one of these incredibly insidious and vicious things we have to deal with today. And there's actually some textual comparisons to make with these sorts of people in the Iliad, which we will get into in short. But I guess without further ado, let's get into the subject matter. So, for anyone who doesn't know the story of the Iliad, which is kind of important here, and this can be as minimal as having seen the movie Troy, which, everyone loves to make fun of it. It's not the Iliad. It's not the story of the Iliad. Not really. It has, obviously loosely based on the same basic story, but the essential plot points are the same for what we're going to be talking about, which is the relationship between Achilles and Patrokles. The movie Troy depicted Achilles and Patrokles as cousins, which nicely dodges the question going on here. But in the Iliad, of course, that's not the case. Achilles was this warrior king of the Myrmidons, and Patrokles is another warrior, a kind of servant to Achilles. And of course, for those of you who don't know, Achilles, in his anger with another king, Agamemnon, withdraws from the fighting, and so the Achaeans, the Greeks, begin to lose the fight. And Patrokles, having compassion on his fellow soldiers, puts on Achilles' armor and goes out and fights in Achilles' place. This is thematically huge, which we'll also get into shortly. And he's killed by one of the great Trojan warriors, Hector. And this is, really cuts to the heart for Achilles. It makes him incredibly sad. And it's very clear that Achilles loved Patrokles. And so, the question is, were they gay lovers? Were they homosexual? We are talking about the Greeks after all, right? So the theorists like to argue. There's zero textual evidence of that in the Iliad itself. There's also no contemporary references to that in other texts, at least not that I'm familiar with. I've never heard any ancient sources that even hint at anything like that. Even someone like Plato, who in some of his texts made arguments that the greatest, imaginable army would be composed by a perfectly paired, army of gay lovers because they would be loyal to each other. I forget which dialogue that was in. Makes no reference that I'm aware of to anything like that with the Achaeans, and Achilles was the greatest hero known to the Greeks of Plato's time. There is no textual reference for it. The entire source of this theory seems to come from a single, someone who I'm going to infer is a feminist author named Madeline Miller. Madeline Miller wrote a novel called The Song of Achilles back in the 90s at some point. I don't remember where. I haven't read the book, and I have no intention to ever read the book for these reasons going on here. And this novel seems to be the entirety of the basis of this theory. How plausible is this theory? Well, is there some, plausible truth to Madeline Miller's ideas that perhaps this kind of close relationship implies a gay lover? I'm gonna say as definitively as I think anyone can say that is wrong, and it's wrong because it's too superficial. But in order to go into that, we have to go into what the relationship was between Achilles and Patrokles. So what was Patrokles to Achilles in the Iliad? What were these two to each other? Aside from the details, which is that Patrokles was a murderer, actually, who was taken in by Achilles' father Peleus into his court and became a kind of servant to the family. It's implied that he was maybe older than Achilles, probably not by much. That's speculative, but he was a servant and a friend and a comrade. They were fighters together, and just from the fact that they were comrades in arms together, there's a kind of intimacy that is completely asexual that comes along with that leftists, and not to be sexist here, but women, I think, have a hard time understanding. You see a glimpse of an artistic depiction of this in Black Hawk Down, or at the very end, Hoot is asked, this Delta commando who's about to go back into Mogadishu, why are you, he's talking about how the people back home can't understand that it's about the man next to you. It's not even really about love of country or the mission or anything like that. It's about this deep, intimate camaraderie that exists between men who are risking their lives for each other and trusting each other's lives to each other. And it's a deep and profound connection that I think is forgotten and lost in times of peace, but is always rediscovered because it's as old as, the Bronze Age, if not older. So that's the most maybe obvious and direct connection there. And of course, someone who's been fighting together and been Achilles' reference is taking like 7 cities or something, or in the surrounding area around Troy, and Patrokles was no doubt fighting right alongside with them. So there's that connection off the bat. But there are also 2 significant, deeper thematic connections that are that we can look to here. And I wanted to read a couple passages actually from my favorite book on Homeric epic, and that is The Ancient Greek Hero in 24 Hours by Greg Nagy. Greg Nagy is a philologist from Harvard, an absolutely brilliant scholar, and all of his works, I don't know about all of them, many of his works, are available online for free. They're a phenomenal resource. I cannot recommend highly enough. But what you can see, so the first symbolic significance of the relationship between Achilles and Patrokles can be seen in their names. So the name Patrokles comes from the roots paterkleos, which is like the glory of the forefathers, or the glory of the fathers. And it ties in symbolically with this whole heroic endeavor that Achilles is undertaking, this idea of heroic immortalization, of having your name remembered forever in song by the deeds you've done. Patrokles' name is literally, and think about this from a poet, an epic poet's perspective, and how you craft the stories, how you ascribe names to different characters to make all of this work. I know the working assumption here is that everyone's names are historical or something. That probably wasn't the case. Achilles may have been a real person and Patrocles wasn't, or maybe they were and their names got changed, or maybe it's just a coincidence. That's also possible too. But Greg Nagy seems to think that there's significance to the choice of names in how the story is told, or maybe how the story was crafted around the names that already existed in history. It doesn't matter. What's significant is the relationship between the names, and we think that it goes beyond mere coincidence because of a story that Phoenix tells to Achilles, specifically in Book 9 of the Iliad, when he's trying to talk Achilles back into the fight. Achilles' name means something like sorrow of the people, and we're going to see another comparison to that name shortly, but I'm probably signposting too much. So let me just read this passage. This is the tale that that Phoenix is telling to Achilles. So Phoenix has come over to Achilles, and he's trying to say, Achilles, this is why you should come back into the fight. There's another story of a man who is in a position like you, who had withdrawn from fighting, and this is his story. Quote, so long as Meleagros, dear to Ares, was fighting in the war, things went badly for the Chorites of the city of Pleuron, and they could not put up a resistance against the Aetolians outside the city walls of Pleuron, the city of the courtiers. I'm almost certainly mispronouncing most of these. Even though they had a multitude of fighters. But as soon as anger entered Meleagros, the kind of anger that affects also others, making their thinking swell to the point of bursting inside their chest, even if at other times they had sound thoughts, then things changed. He was angry in his heart at his dear mother Althea, and he was lying around next to his wife, whom he had courted and married in the proper way. She was the beautiful Cleopatra, whose mother was Marpessa, the one with the beautiful ankles, daughter of Eunos, and whose father was Ides, a man most powerful among the earthbound men who lived in those times. It was he, Ides, who grabbed his bow and had stood up against the Lord, Phoebus Apollo, and he had done it for the sake of his bride, the one with the beautiful ankles. She, Cleopatra, had been given a special name by the father and by the queen mother back then, when she was growing up in the palace. They called her Alcyone, making that a second name for her, because her mother Marpessa was feeling the same pain felt by the halcyon bird, known for her many sorrows, penthos. She was crying because she had been seized and carried away by the one who has far-reaching power, Phoebus Apollo. So right next to her, he lay down, nursing his anger, an anger that brings pains to the heart. He was angry about the curses that had been made by his own mother. She had been praying to the gods, making many curses in her sorrow over the killing of her brother. Many times did she beat the earth, nourisher of many, with her hands, calling upon Hades and on terrifying Persephone. Actually, you know what? I think we've gone over the relevant stuff here. Basically, what Phoenix is saying is, here's the story of this other guy whose town was under siege, and basically he was being mistreated by his own family, his own mother, the town, so he withdrew from the fighting, and eventually they offered him lots of money to go back into the fight, but he didn't take it, and eventually they broke down or threatened to break down, so he had to go back and fight anyways, and he got no rewards for it. So Achilles, clearly it's better to take Agamemnon's counteroffer and come back in now, while you can earn great time, great glory in the form of material possessions, which was what Agamemnon was offering at the time. Now, what's important to point out here, though, and the whole point of bringing up this otherwise very strange, sort of cryptic passage, is the names that they chose here. Meleagros is married to this woman, Cleopatra. Cleopatra, if you notice, has exactly the same etymology as Patrocles. They just flipped the roots. Patrokleos, Kleos, patros. It's the glory of the fathers in both cases. And Meleagros is being directly compared to Achilles in this case. So how does, of course, comparing Achilles and Patrokles to a man named Meleagros and his wife have to do with saying they're not gay? Well, the importance is in the symbolic relationship. The importance is that this other character, Patrokles or Cleopatra, is a symbol. To view them as a sexual relationship is to miss their greater significance as a symbolic element in the poetic form being offered here. And this foil of a story here basically demonstrates that the names are not just incidental. The names are actually very intentionally chosen and paired up in this way because of their significance. The story of the Iliad is a story about heroism. It's about what it means to be a hero. And Patrokles is central to that. He is, in a way, the embodiment of what it means to be a hero. And if people read my book, The Hero and the Man, which goes into that, it's not a happy ending. His death is a key element of heroism. It is the key to heroism in some ways. But the relationship goes deeper than that. So off the bat, we have this significance of the name of Patrokles and its relationship to Achilles and his project within the broader construct of this story. But Greg Nagy goes further, and he says that Patrokles can actually be understood as a body double, therapon, to Achilles. And this is actually referenced in the text directly. So I'm going to read a bit at length again here. And this is where Achilles has assented to letting Patrokles go out and fight. But he's told him to, whatever you do, don't fight Hector. As soon as you preserve the Greeks and fight them off your ships, if you see Hector, fall back. Don't engage with him. And after he said that, and Patrokles leaves, he says a prayer. And his prayer goes as follows. King Zeus, he cried out, Lord of Dodona, God of the Pelasgoi, who dwells afar, you who hold stormy Dodona in your sway, or the Seloi, your seers, dwell around you with their feet unwashed and their beds made upon the ground, just as you heard what I was saying when I prayed to you before, and did me honor by sending disaster on the Achaean people, so also now grant me the fulfillment of yet a further prayer, and it is this. I shall stay here at my assembly of ships, but I shall send my comrade into battle at the head of many Myrmidons, sending him to fight. Send forth, O all-seeing Zeus, a radiance to go before him. Make bold the heart inside his chest, so that Hector may find out whether he knows how to fight alone, my attendant, or whether his hands can only be so invincible, with your fury that I myself enter the war struggle of Ares. Afterwards, when he has chased away from the ships the attack and cry of battle, grant that he may return unharmed to the swift ships, with his armor and his comrades, fighters in close combat. Thus did he Achilles pray, and Zeus the planner heard his prayer. Part of it he did indeed grant him, but the other part he refused. He granted that Patrokles should thrust back war and battle from the ships, yet he granted that. But he refused to let him come safely out of the fight. And so to circle back here, when he says, make bold the heart inside his chest so that Hector may find out whether he knows how to fight alone, my attendant, that phrase, my attendant, is this word therapon. And this section, which is hour 6 of Greg Nagy's book, Greg Nagy opens by saying the key word for this hour is therapon, which is attendant, ritual substitute. And the key passage comes from the climactic moment, blah, blah, blah. the idea is that therapon is a ritual substitution of the kind that you see in religious sacrifices. And indeed, he goes into detail describing the nature of Patroclus' death, how he is struck first from the front with this stunning blow, and then struck from the back. He's hit by like 3 different people, and Hector only delivers the coup de grace. Hector only delivers the final finishing off blow. The real killing strike is actually delivered by Apollo himself. And the form of that 3-strike execution is modeled on the way in which rams and cattle were ritually slaughtered in offerings to the gods. It was a very surreal experience for me reading this book, actually, because my wife and I were watching Sons of Anarchy, and I happened to be going over that section at the time when Opie is killed, and it's a very similar kind of death scene where it's a horrible scene to watch, but it's very, very well done as far as cinema art goes, where he's struck from the back, and then he kind of falls to his knees, and then he's struck from the front. And I think there it was only 2 blows, but it was still very similar in that kind of form. This very, like, almost a formalized killing, like a ritual in a way. And of course, Patroclus' death is in some ways kind of the climax of the story of the Iliad. And it's the climax in that way because, as Greg Nagy argues, Patroclus is a body double for Achilles. He is a body double and the use of the term therapon, which had this deeper ritual meaning, which isn't just attendant, it's also body double in this ritual kind of way, signifies it's a foreshadowing of Achilles' own death. And it's a reminder to the audience that Achilles' death is coming too. The relationship, therefore, between Achilles and Patroclus, both from their name and from this ritual substitute concept that we see emerging from the use of this term therapon, means that in a very deep sense, Patroclus is an emanation or an aspect of Achilles himself. He is symbolically significant to Achilles at the level of the poem. So to see the closeness and the intimacy, the way in which Achilles loves Patroclus as homosexuality, is to completely miss the love Achilles has for heroism and for the idea of immortality and song that drives him to war in the first place. If he was after just pure pleasure, as he bemoans later on in the story, he would have just stayed home. He would never have gone in the first place, and indeed in a few places seems to regret that he didn't just stay home. So I mentioned before that there is some textual anticipation of people like Madeline Miller. And I don't want to say too much without having read her books. She's also the author of Circe, a sort of feminist recasting of the Odyssey, which I'm sure is just as subversive and using these great stories for advancing ideologies far inferior to the story that she's attempting to utilize for that purpose. But where was I? So I said that there was some anticipation in the text of this kind of speculative denigration. And we see a little bit of it in the Iliad in the character of Thersites. Thersites is a much more important character, I think, than his brief appearance might lead someone to believe. Thersites basically pops up in, I want to say book 2. Maybe it's book 3. I don't remember exactly offhand. But basically, Agamemnon has just made a bad call and has scared a bunch of people needlessly. And Thersites, who's just this common soldier, he's a very ugly person. Homer spends a great deal of time describing how ugly he is. Starts basically mocking the king and making fun of him. And Homer says basically everyone sort of hated Thersites, but also kind of couldn't help but laugh and go along with his raillery, with his criticism. And he's depicted as having a kind of psychological insight, a kind of ability to get under people's skin and push their buttons. And he starts railing against King Agamemnon, and Odysseus shows up out of the blue and basically beats him over the back and says, enough of that. It's not your place to talk to kings that way. If I catch you doing that again, there's basically more where that came from. And everyone who had been laughing at Thersites' raillery is now laughing along at Odysseus beating him, and says, Odysseus has done us many good turns, but never as good of a turn as when he shut up that Thersites. This is, I think, tragically, one of the things about modern society is the toleration for that kind of insubordination. I know freedom of speech is excellent. I've defended free speech for a better part of a decade in a fairly extreme form that leftists themselves don't agree with or believe. But it does leave very little answer and little counter to this kind of raillery. At least nothing that's very obvious once you take dueling and fighting words out of the picture, which used to be part of American legal doctrine. But it's a digression for another day. The important part is another tale about Thersites, one that doesn't show up in the Iliad, but pops up in a couple of different accounts. I want to say Apollodorus mentions him. I think there's one other source that both gives the same story. But basically, there was an Amazon warrior queen named Penthesilea. And Greg Nagy spends some time dwelling, in fact, on the relationship between Penthesilea and Achilles, specifically the relationship between their names, which, just as Patrokles and Cleopatra have the same meaning, somewhat less obviously because of the difference in syllables, but Penthesilea and Achilles actually mean the same thing. It means something like sorrow of the people or sadness of the people. And Achilles ends up killing Penthesilea in combat. In fact, there's a fairly famous black figure vase depicting him killing her. And apparently the story is that Achilles felt some kind of way about killing this woman in battle. And Thersites picked up on that and started making fun of him and accusing Achilles of loving her. And Achilles, flustered and frustrated with that, just turned around and killed Thersites. He wasn't as humane as Odysseus in merely beating him over the back. He just killed him outright. And it's I don't know if that's any kind of answer to to people who try to mock and make allegations about the sexuality and the underlying motives, this kind of Freudian speculation about other people, because obviously we don't live in a piratical Bronze Age world. we live in a civilization where that kind of insubordinate speculation is just something that we tolerate. But it does amuse me that Homer seems to have, at least for our gratitude, given a name and a particularly memorable face and a figure to the sort of person who does that, and we can, I think, at least take solace in the textual anticipation and connection with that character. And at the end of the day, those people will always exist. You can't. It's not as if you could just kill them all and get rid of them. It might not even be desirable to do that. Achilles seemed, first, after being sad for killing Penthesilea, he was then maybe not regretful exactly, but sad and in need of cleansing after killing Thersites too. Something with Odysseus supposedly helped him out with. So it all comes down to which sort of person would you rather be. There are reasons to want to emulate Achilles, and as I argue in Hero and the Man, there are reasons to not want to emulate Achilles as well. But there is, I don't think, any good reason to emulate Thersites and his various likenesses that pop up across the ages, in male or female form. So I think that's enough on that subject. Achilles and Patrokles were not gay, definitively. There's no textual evidence for that. There's no textual support or reason to think that. There's no mention of that, and there is mention of quite a lot of other nastiness that went on back in the time. So it's not out of some kind of squeamishness that the author just didn't mention that. But more importantly, there are much more obvious and deeper reasons why they had such a deep relationship, dwelt upon and explained by much greater minds than Madeline Miller's. And they're very worth exploring. Those kinds of relationships that we've been tragically robbed of by the by the persistent sort of insinuation that any deep, meaningful, intimate male friendships must be tinged by a hint of homosexuality. They of course, the Thersites of today like to do that with gym culture too, but of course it's a projection of their own misunderstanding of that kind of connection. They don't know what Hoot was talking about, and they don't know what Homer was talking about either. So anyways, I won't belabor the point. I hope that's answered the question, and hopefully I'll have more to say about Homer going forward, that's in a little bit more of a positive tone. So thanks so much for listening. I hope you all have a pleasant evening.